Hey everybody, it's Tom, and this week we're going to got myself a little bug there. This week we're going to talk about Shambhala, Sacred Path of the Warrior by Chogyam Trungpa. Shambhala, or Shangri-La, this ideal kingdom within the Buddhist tradition, within the tradition of the East. And in many ways, there's perhaps even an analogy with the conception of the kingdom of God as one encounters it in the Christian tradition. Not that one wishes to push that analogy too far. Chogyam Trungpa takes up the notion of Shambhala in connection with an effort to articulate in a secular manner some of the themes which emerge from the intersection of the Buddhist tradition and elements of indigenous Tibetan mythology, religion, framework, etc. Chogyam Trungpa himself, incidentally, was with us only a brief time. I believe he was 47. He was born in 1939 and unfortunately died in 1987, likely from complications pertaining to liver disease. Unfortunately, he was a heavy drinker, and that had a role to play in his premature demise. The controversies attending to Chogyam Trungpa's life notwithstanding, his use of alcohol being one of them, he is, and I just want to get that out of the way so it's not lurking in the background. There are other problems too. Some of his teaching methods were considered controversial, perhaps even authoritarian, and there are incidents in terms of his sexual promiscuity. Promiscuity is probably too strong of a word, but a certain liberalism that also raised more than one eyebrow. Those challenges are there, notwithstanding, but you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because in tandem with having, these things going on in his life, he still provided powerful transmission of the Buddhist and the Tibetan traditions in new ways, so that the Western ear, or perhaps more specifically the American ear, could receive the visions of those traditions in a more fruitful fashion. And the Shambhala teachings were part of that. The Shambhala was an attempt, as I already noted, to re-articulate some themes within his background in a specifically secular fashion. So much by way of preface. What is this? What are these teachings? What is this vision? And the vision is entitled variously, but one of the most prominent ways of approaching it is the notion of the vision of the great eastern sun, the rising sun, which is a metaphor standing in for the luminosity of, let us say, being itself. And the radical claim is that if we permit ourselves to enter into a state of openness towards reality, what becomes evident is its fundamental goodness, positive quality. We're not talking about something moral. We're not talking about a valence of moral goodness or ethical goodness, which is sort of almost derivative. We're talking about a fundamentally worthwhile solidity. We're talking about the claim that it is better that the world is than that it is not, and that we are part of it. And in connection with the insight that the world is fundamentally worthwhile, one realizes that oneself, that I or you am or are fundamentally worthwhile. And on the basis of that, a new and powerful freedom can arise. A freedom from what Trungpa calls the setting sun vision of the world. The setting sun vision is one wherein we are constantly haunted by the notion that there is a need to escape, or to oppose, or to obtain, or to extract, that we are in a constant state of reactivity vis-a-vis our environment, vis-a-vis the questions of our identity. We are in a constantly harassed state of mind. And we endure that state because it is predicated on the delusion that to desist from reaction, to encounter who and what we actually are in a very basic way, would translate into something of a disaster. We are, in essence, afraid of who we are. Now, as you noted, the subtitle of the book, The Sacred Path of the Warrior, right? This connects directly, this point I just made, that we tend to be afraid of ourselves, connects directly to how Trungpa defines the conception of the warrior. The warrior is one who is brave, and the essence of bravery is not to be afraid of oneself. The concomitant, or what does that mean? What does it mean not to be afraid of yourself? And I kept coming back to this one word, and that one word is vulnerability, which relates to the notion of openness. If you just allow yourself to be open to who and what you are, then all of a sudden the need to be harassed or to harass or be in a state of excitation falls away, and you can actually just trust the ground of where you are right now, this moment, this wonderfully ordinary moment. And that's where magic happens, or drala is a Tibetan word, because and Trungpa talks about that. He says, all right, when you get to this state of insight, then you can draw upon magic, but not magic in this supernatural way where we're going to manipulate the elements in bizarre and mysterious fashion. It's rather the magic that arises from allowing reality itself to just work. In connection with this process, Trungpa says something that he calls natural hierarchy. Well, I bridle at the word hierarchy because of the connotations that issue forth regarding power relationships. But what's the more fundamental point, bracketing power relationships within the human world for the moment anyway, is that the world itself has a kind of structure to it, a kind of fitting togetherness that if we just sort of let it work on its own, can serve to unfold and make things positively magnificent. There are various ways of pointing to the contours of that structure. He uses the Eastern concept of heaven, earth, and humanity, with the heavens above, the earth below, and the humanity connecting these two terms in a fashion which allows forward progress to occur. There's also sort of the Tibetan idea of a tripartite related notion. Isn't exactly the same thing of Lu, which is like the water or the basis, Nyan, which is sort of the earthy ground upon which we live and with which the water interacts, and La, which is sort of the mountain peaks, and the sort of cyclical relationship which obtains among these terms, and it can come out in various ways, such as the seasons and so forth. And then he goes into that in greater detail in the text, and I'm going to leave it to him to go ahead and offer that explication. Because what struck me in reading it, apart from the power of his main points, which is that we can open and trust reality in ourselves, and that alone is a ground upon which we can become truly decent human beings, which is the true task of the warrior. What really struck me is that apart from just the conceptual frameworks which he sets up to help us come to these insights, the reading of its own accord had a kind of power. You're sort of grabbed by his words in a way which can't really be conveyed, and you know, I was struck by a kind of reawakening to the need to be more vulnerable in my own part, in my own relationships, and I was reminded of to what a degree I had allowed myself to sort of fall into habits, behaviors, patterns that actually sheltered me from the challenge of that vulnerability. And so, I would encourage you, regardless of where you stand vis-a-vis this tradition, to check out the book, precisely because it sort of pulls you into a journey in your own right, and compels a process of self-examination that I feel is ultimately fruitful, and which ultimately contributes to the realization of Shambhala, or an ideal kingdom or realm, is not something which is sort of hiding somewhere in the Himalayas or in an extra dimension or supernatural field, but which is actually here and now, and which is realized by embodiment in our own life. And then this is where we're no longer talking about just some interesting line of reflection that we inherit from Buddhism or an Eastern tradition, but a way to start to approach the broader challenges and problems that we encounter with the environment, with the economy, with wars, and all the rest of it. Because you can track all these unfortunate occurrences back to a dysfunctional relationship with the present moment and with our own selves. And the beginning of resolving those challenges is to resolve, ameliorate, fix, come into a more positive relationship with those terms. And even though I brought it up only at the end, the crux is this notion of nowness. And now that's tricky too, because we have to, be on point right here and right now. The paradox is to do that is to be relaxed, but relaxed in a disciplined fashion. Discipline here isn't a kind of behavioral rigidity. In fact, it's quite the contrary. It's a kind of willingness to submit oneself to the structure of the moment and not allow the temptations of our subconscious gossip, as Chogyam Trungpa calls it, to pull us out of that moment. And if we can do that, the hope is we will then be spontaneously driven to a certain gentleness and generosity, which then are the manifestations which connect the ideal of Shambhala to the reality, and which can perhaps help us address the broader social and political challenges of our time. So, that about sums it up for today with respect to Mr. Trungpa's little book here. And I want to emphasize my gratitude to Mr. Trungpa for having, brought these sorts of traditions to the West, and his contributions are far greater than this book, and you'll see links below and all the rest of it. And there's the promise that we can all make those contributions, whatever our imperfections may be. So I guess we'll leave it there for this week. Well, I want to add one more point, and that is simply the note that there's a lot of parallelism between what's being addressed here in a work which is derived from the Tibetan folk and Buddhist traditions, and the constellations of themes that we encountered in previous weeks with Thomas Merton, or even Bachelard before that, So there is a kind of heritage that isn't bounded by a culture or a sect or a tradition or a period of history, a heritage that we have as human beings of wisdom that offers us promise of movement beyond despondency to joy and fulfillment, and an ability to deal with what is difficult in life, all in the same moment. That, I think, is extraordinarily encouraging. And so that really, we'll leave it there then, as far as the work goes. In terms of next week, what's next up? Right, I've been getting a bit mystical lately. We're going to sort of step back from that, and we're going to visit important book. There's an airplane. We're waiting on that. We're proximate to an airport, which is why from time to time of late we've had these audio difficulties. But Sigmund Freud's, wow, that plane just keeps on going. Sigmund Freud's Civilization and Discontent. We're going to pick that up next week and see where that leads us. I think it's going to lead us in a slightly different direction, and I don't know. I sense I'm going to have some tensions with Sigmund, but I could be wrong about that. So anyway, that's this week. Once again, Shambhala, The Sacred Path of the Warrior, Chögyam Trungpa, a very solid book inviting us to realize courage through vulnerability. This has been Tom Lynn, and hopefully I'll catch you guys next week. Ciao.